The unexpected encounter. The sun blazed harshly over the rocky terrain of the alien planet, painting the endless horizon in shades of orange and crimson. Alex shielded his eyes with a makeshift visor, his survival gear tattered after days of wandering. His ship, a small cargo freighter, was nothing more than a smoldering wreck several miles behind him. Supplies were dwindling, and the hope of rescue seemed like a distant dream. Yet, Alex trudged forward, driven by the sheer will to survive. As he climbed over a jagged hill, something caught his attention. A faint, silvery glint shimmered in the distance. Curious and desperate for anything that could aid him, Alex quickened his pace, his boots crunching against the dry, brittle ground. The source of the glint soon came into view, a metallic object partially buried in the dirt. But it wasn't the object that made Alex freeze in his tracks. Beside it lay a figure, motionless and almost blending with the rocky landscape. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the light or a piece of debris. But as he approached cautiously, he realized it was a person, or rather, an alien. The figure was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly like polished quartz. Her features were sharp yet strangely beautiful, with large, luminous eyes that flickered open as Alex drew near. She wore a sleek, tattered outfit that hinted at advanced technology, though it was torn in places, revealing deep wounds oozing with a glowing, bluish fluid. Alex hesitated. Helping her could mean trouble. He didn't know who or what she was. But leaving her to die felt wrong. His conscience wouldn't allow it. "Hey," he said cautiously, kneeling beside her. His voice sounded small in the vast emptiness around them. "Can you hear me?" The alien's eyes focused on him weakly. She parted her lips, and to Alex's surprise, she spoke. Her voice was soft, melodic, but laced with pain. "H-human, please, help me." Alex's heart raced. He didn't understand how she knew his language, but her plea was unmistakable. He glanced at her wounds, realizing she didn't have much time. "You're hurt," he said, fumbling with the small medical kit strapped to his belt. "I'll try to help, but I don't know if this will work on you." The alien woman winced as he applied a sterile bandage to the deepest cut on her arm. Her glowing blood seeped through the material, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she locked her gaze on Alex, her luminous eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Fear, gratitude, or perhaps both. "Why are you out here alone?" Alex asked, more to fill the silence than to expect an answer. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. "Escape. I had to. They will come." The cryptic response sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He scanned the area, suddenly feeling exposed. "Who's coming? Are you in danger?" The alien's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Not just me. You too. They will kill us both." Alex swallowed hard. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was in, but it was clear she believed they were both at risk now. For a moment, he considered walking away, leaving her to fend for herself. After all, he had his own survival to worry about. But then he saw the way she looked at him, like he was her last hope in the universe. It was a look that made his chest tighten. "All right," he said finally, packing up his medical kit. "Let's get you out of here. Can you walk?" The alien woman tried to rise but stumbled, her legs too weak to support her. Without thinking, Alex slipped an arm under her shoulders and helped her stand. She leaned heavily on him, her shimmering skin cool against his own. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice trembling. "You are different." Alex didn't reply. He didn't know what she meant, and there wasn't time to ask. They needed shelter, somewhere to hide and figure out their next move. He scanned the horizon, spotting a cluster of jagged rocks that might offer some cover. "We'll rest over there," he said, nodding toward the rocks. "But you need to tell me everything. Who's after you, and why?" The alien woman nodded weakly but didn't speak again. Her energy seemed to fade with each step, and Alex wondered if she'd even make it to the rocks. As they trudged forward, the air around them grew eerily silent, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Alex tightened his grip on her, his mind racing. He didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into, but one thing was clear. This encounter was about to change his life forever. A bond beyond species. The alien woman, Zira, stirred as the faint glow of the twin suns bathed their makeshift shelter in soft light. Alex had found refuge for them in a hollowed-out cave, its jagged walls offering some protection from the endless wasteland outside. He sat by a small fire, carefully inspecting the contents of his dwindling supplies. His gaze occasionally flicked toward Zira, who lay wrapped in a thermal blanket he'd salvaged from his wrecked ship. When her eyes fluttered open, Alex moved closer. "Hey, you're awake. How are you feeling?" Zira tilted her head slightly, studying him with a look of quiet curiosity. Her voice was a faint whisper, each word deliberate. "Strange, but alive. You saved me." Alex shrugged, feeling a strange mix of relief and awkwardness. "I couldn't just leave you out there." Zira's gaze lingered on him, her luminous eyes flickering like dying embers. "Humans, you're not like us. My people, they would have left me." Her word hung in the air, heavy with implications. Alex frowned, sensing a deep sorrow beneath her calm exterior. Why would they do that? Don't they care about their own? Zira hesitated, as if searching for the right way to explain. Caring is weakness. To survive, we must not feel. Emotion clouds judgment. That is our way. Alex leaned back against the rough wall of the cave, digesting her words. "That sounds cold." Zira nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. "It is, but it is also why they will come for me. I broke our laws, human. I refuse to obey." I felt. The confession caught Alex off guard. He leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "What do you mean? What did you refuse to do?" Zira's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Alex thought she wouldn't answer. Then she whispered, "My mission was to destroy your kind." The fire crackled between them, its faint light casting flickering shadows on the cave walls. Alex's heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. "Destroy humans. Why?" Zira's hands clenched the blanket tightly, her voice trembling. "Your people. They frighten us. So powerful, yet so reckless. My leaders believe you will destroy the galaxy if left unchecked." Alex let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's ironic, considering you were sent here to wipe us out." "I didn't want to," Zira said quickly, her voice rising with sudden urgency. "When I saw your world, your people, I couldn't do it. You're not what they told us. You're more than war and destruction. You have compassion." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Alex saw something raw and unguarded in her expression. Vulnerability. It was an alien concept to her, quite literally. And yet here she was, bearing her soul to a man she barely knew. "So you ran," Alex said quietly. Zira nodded. "I defied my orders, and now they hunt me. If they find me, they will kill me, and anyone who helped me." Alex exhaled sharply, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He stared into the fire, his mind racing. Helping her meant putting himself in the crosshairs of a threat he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But leaving her to face it alone, that was something he couldn't live with. "We'll figure something out," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm not letting them take you." Zira blinked, her expression softening. "Why would you do that? You owe me nothing." Alex met her gaze, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe it's just human nature, or maybe I see something in you worth saving." The words seemed to catch her off guard, and for a moment Zira looked away, as if the intensity of his gaze was too much to bear. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Thank you, Alex. The sound of her saying his name sent a strange warmth through him, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. "We need a plan," he said, standing and brushing off his hands. "If they're coming for you, we can't stay here. Do you know how to contact anyone who might help?" Zira hesitated, then shook her head. "I am alone." Alex frowned, pacing the small space. "All right. Then we'll need to move fast. My ship's wrecked, but maybe we can salvage parts from it. If we're lucky, we can rig something up to get off this planet." "And if we're not lucky?" Zira asked, her tone laced with quiet dread. Alex grinned, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Then we improvise." For the first time since they'd met, Zira smiled, a small, tentative thing that softened her sharp features. "You are strange, human, but I think I like it." The moment hung between them, fragile yet profound. In that instant, Alex realized that Zira wasn't just another alien. She was someone who had risked everything to make a choice, to follow her conscience instead of blind orders. And in doing so, she had shown more humanity than many of his own kind. "Let's get to work," Alex said, grabbing his gear. "We've got a galaxy to outrun." As they prepared to leave, neither of them noticed the faint hum of an approaching ship, its sleek silhouette cutting through the crimson sky like a blade. The hunt had already begun. The chase begins. The sun dipped lower in the alien sky, casting long, eerie shadows over the jagged landscape. Alex and Zira moved cautiously through the rocky terrain, their footsteps muffled by the dry, dusty ground. Every sound, every shift in the wind, felt amplified, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Alex kept glancing over his shoulder, his nerves on edge. Zira's earlier warning echoed in his mind. "They'll kill us both if they find me with you." He didn't know much about who they were, but the sheer fear in her voice told him all he needed to know. They were dangerous, and they were close. "How much farther to your ship?" Zira asked, her voice low but steady. "Not far," Alex replied, adjusting the strap of the makeshift pack slung over his shoulder. "It's over that ridge. If we can scavenge enough parts, we might be able to rig up something to get off this rock." Zira nodded, though her expression remained tense. She clutched a small spherical device, something she'd taken from her crashed pod. Alex had asked her about it earlier, but she'd only said, "It's our best chance." He didn't press for details. Right now, survival took precedence over curiosity. The air grew colder as they approached the ridge, the ground beneath their feet shifting to loose gravel. Alex was about to speak when Zira suddenly froze, her head snapping to the side. Her eyes widened, and she raised a hand to signal silence. "What is it?" Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. Zira didn't answer. Instead, she crouched low, her luminous eyes scanning the horizon. Alex followed her gaze, squinting against the dimming light. At first, he saw nothing. Then a faint shimmer appeared in the distance, like heat waves rising from the ground. But this was no mirage. "They found us," Zira said, her voice trembling. Alex felt his stomach drop. "How many?" "Too many," she replied, her tone grim. "They've deployed seekers. They'll track us no matter where we go." "Seekers?" Alex asked, his heart racing. Zira pointed toward the shimmering shapes, which were now growing more defined. They resembled sleek, insect-like machines, their metallic bodies glinting in the fading sunlight. They hovered a few feet above the ground, their movements unnervingly precise. "They won't stop until they have me," Zira said, gripping the device in her hands. "And if you're with me, they'll kill you too." Alex clenched his jaw, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Not if we get to my ship first." He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, abandoning caution in favor of speed. The ridge was steeper than he remembered, but he pushed on, the sound of their pursuers growing louder with each passing second. Zira stumbled once, but Alex caught her, his grip firm, and unyielding. "We're almost there," he shouted, the crash site now visible at the base of the ridge. The wreckage of his ship lay scattered across the ground, its once pristine hull now charred and broken. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope. The first seeker crested the ridge just as they reached the ship. Its glowing red sensor locked onto them, emitting a high-pitched whine that made Alex's skin crawl. "Get inside," he yelled, shoving Zira toward the ship's open hatch. "What about you?" she protested, hesitating. "I'll hold them off." Alex grabbed a piece of scrap metal, wielding it like a makeshift weapon. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The seeker lunged toward him, its sharp, claw-like appendages slicing through the air. Alex swung the scrap metal with all his strength, striking the machine's sensor and sending it spiraling to the ground. Sparks erupted from its damaged body, but Alex had no time to celebrate. More seekers were closing in. "Alex," Zyra's voice cut through the chaos. She was standing in the hatch, the spherical device in her hands. "Get down." Without questioning, Alex dropped to the ground. Zira pressed a hidden button on the device, and a pulse of blue energy shot out in all directions. The wave hit the approaching seekers, causing them to glitch and collapse, their mechanical limbs twitching before falling still. Alex stared in disbelief as the machines lay motionless around them. What did you just do?" Zira stepped down from the ship, her expression both relieved and cautious. "It's an EMP device. Temporary, but effective. We need to leave before they send more." Alex nodded, his heart still pounding. Together, they climbed into the wrecked ship, Zira helping him locate the parts they needed. The atmosphere inside the vessel was tense, every creak of metal or distant sound outside reminding them of the danger. As they worked, Alex couldn't help but glance at Zira. She moved with purpose, her earlier fear replaced by determination. For someone who claimed her people shunned emotions, she was showing plenty of courage and resolve. "We can do this," Alex said, more to himself than to her. "We're getting out of here." Zira looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "With you, human, I almost believe it." Their moment of connection was brief, interrupted by the distant sound of engines. Alex's blood ran cold. The seekers weren't alone anymore. Reinforcements were coming. And this time, it wouldn't just be machines. "We have to move fast," Alex said, his voice tight. "Because if they catch us, there's no second chance." Escaping the hunters, the rhythmic hum of engines grew louder, reverberating through the rocky terrain like an ominous drumbeat. Alex crouched behind the half-collapsed hull of his ship, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Beside him, Zira was frantically working on the scavenged components they had salvaged, her fingers moving with a speed and precision that defied her weakened state. "This has to work," Alex muttered, glancing over his shoulder at the horizon. The shimmering outlines of more seekers were now visible, and among them were larger, more menacing shapes. These weren't drones. They were manned crafts, sleek and deadly, hovering low over the ground like predatory birds. "It will work," Zira replied, her voice steady but strained. "If we have enough time." Time was a luxury they didn't have. Alex gritted his teeth, scanning the wreckage for anything that could buy them even a few precious minutes. His eyes landed on the emergency flares strapped to a damaged panel. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Keep working," he told Zira, grabbing the flares. "I'll distract them." "What?" Zyra looked up sharply, her glowing eyes wide with alarm. "Alex, you can't." "I can. And I will," he interrupted, his tone firm. "Just get that thing running. I'll draw them away." Before she could protest further, Alex sprinted out from the cover of the ship, his boots kicking up dust as he moved. He ignited one of the flares, its brilliant red light slicing through the growing dusk. Waving it above his head, he shouted, "Over here, come and get me." The seekers immediately reacted, their sensors locking onto the heat signature. A sharp, mechanical screech pierced the air as the first of the drones broke formation and surged toward Alex. He bolted, zigzagging through the rocky terrain, the flare trailing smoke behind him. From her position, Zira watched in horror as Alex led the machines away. Her fingers trembled as she resumed her work, each second feeling like an eternity. She couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Alex ran until his lungs burned, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. The Seekers were relentless, their razor-sharp appendages slicing through the air mere inches from his back. He reached a narrow crevice between two towering rocks and dove inside, narrowly avoiding their grasp. The drones hovered outside, their sensors sweeping the area. Alex held his breath, pressing himself against the cold stone. He could hear the hum of their engines, feel the faint vibration through the ground. Slowly, he reached for another flare, lighting it and tossing it out into the open. The bright light drew the drone's attention, and they surged toward it, their programming overriding any sense of caution. The flare landed near a pile of unstable rocks, and Alex didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy stone and hurled it at the pile, triggering a small landslide. The falling rocks crushed the closest Seekers, their metallic bodies crumpling under the weight. Alex allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before he heard the unmistakable roar of the larger crafts closing in. "Great," he muttered, sprinting back toward the ship. "Now they're mad." Back at the wreckage, Zira had finally finished assembling the makeshift device, a small, thrumming contraption that pulsed with energy. It was a crude, jury-rigged engine that might, with some luck, provide enough thrust to get them off the ground. As Alex burst into view, Zira ran to meet him, her expression a mix of relief and urgency. "Did it work?" "For now," Alex replied, doubling over to catch his breath. "But they got bigger toys coming." Zira nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we have to leave. Now." Together, they hauled the device into place, securing it to the remains of the ship's propulsion system. The sound of approaching engines grew deafening, the shadows of the larger crafts looming over them. "We're out of time," Alex said, climbing into the cockpit. "Can this thing even fly?" "It doesn't have to fly well," Zira replied, sliding into the seat beside him. "It just has to fly long enough." Alex gripped the controls, his knuckles white. "Here goes nothing." He powered up the makeshift engine, and the ship shuddered violently, its damaged systems groaning in protest. The thrusters roared to life, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. The ship lifted off the ground, wobbling precariously as Alex fought to stabilize it. Below, the enemy crafts opened fire, their weapons tearing through the air. Alex swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The ship climbed higher, its patched-together systems straining under the pressure. "Hold it steady," Zira shouted, her hands flying across the controls as she rerouted power to the shields. "Just a little longer." A missile streaked past them, exploding in a blinding flash of light. Alex cursed, his vision swimming from the impact. "We're not going to make it." "Yes, we will," Zira shouted back, her voice fierce. "You're stronger than you think. Alex, trust yourself." Her words ignited something in him, a spark of determination that burned through his fear. With a steady hand, he guided the ship into the upper atmosphere, the blue skies giving way to the cold expanse of space. The enemy crafts hesitated at the edge of the planet's gravity well, their pursuit faltering. Zira slumped back in her seat, her chest rising and falling as she exhaled deeply. "We did it," she whispered, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. Alex glanced at her, a grin spreading across his face, despite the chaos they had just escaped. Barely. As the stars stretched out before them, Alex knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that, together, they might just stand a chance. A love unspoken. The small, battered ship drifted through the silence of space, its patched-together systems barely holding. The makeshift engine hummed with a rhythmic pulse, a faint reminder of their narrow escape. Alex slumped in the pilot's seat, every muscle in his body aching from the intense maneuvering that had gotten them off the planet. His hands were still trembling on the controls, and the adrenaline coursing through his veins was beginning to fade, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its wake. Zira sat beside him, her luminous eyes staring out at the vast expanse of stars. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of relief and something else Alex couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or sadness. The soft glow of the ship's emergency lights reflected off her crystalline skin, making her look almost ethereal. "You okay?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse. Zira didn't respond immediately. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the distant nebula that painted the darkness with streaks of blue and purple. Finally, she turned to him, her voice soft. "You risked everything for me." Alex shrugged, trying to downplay the weight of her words. "What was I supposed to do? Leave you to die?" "Yes," Zira said bluntly, though there was no anger in her tone. "That's what most would have done. It's what my people would have done." "Well, I'm not your people," Alex replied, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And I don't regret it." Zira's eyes searched his face, as if trying to understand something beyond the surface. "Why, Alex? Why would you endanger yourself for someone like me? A stranger. An alien." Alex leaned back in his seat, his gaze drifting to the flickering console. He thought about her question, about everything that had led them to this moment. "I guess I saw something in you. Something worth fighting for." Zira tilted her head, her expression softening. "And what is that?" He hesitated, unsure how to put his feelings into words. "You're different. Not just because you're not human, but because you made a choice. You could have followed orders, done what your people told you to do. But you didn't. You chose to stand against them, to risk everything for what you believed in. That takes courage." Zira's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the console absently. "Courage," she murmured. "On my world, we are taught that courage is foolishness, that obedience is survival. But you make me question everything I was taught." Alex chuckled softly. "Welcome to humanity. We're good at questioning things." Her gaze snapped back to his, and for a moment, the weight of her stare made Alex feel like she was seeing straight into his soul. "You've shown me more than questions," she said quietly. "You've shown me what it means to care." The intensity of her words took Alex off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but Zira continued, her voice trembling slightly. "When you held my hand back on the planet, when you shielded me from danger, it felt different, like nothing I've ever known. Is this what you call love?" Alex's throat tightened. He hadn't expected the conversation to take such a turn, and he wasn't sure how to respond. Love was such a complex thing, layered with emotions and meanings. Could it even exist between two beings so different? "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe. Love isn't something you can always define. Sometimes it's just a feeling. Like you'd do anything to protect someone, even if it costs you everything." Zira's luminous eyes shimmered, and for a moment, Alex thought he saw tears glistening on her crystalline cheeks. "Then perhaps I understand now, because that is what I feel for you." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something he couldn't deny. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly before finally brushing against hers. "Zira," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. A sharp alarm blared through the cockpit, cutting him off. Alex snapped his hand back, his attention shifting to the flashing console. A proximity warning lit up the screen, accompanied by a grainy image of an approaching ship. "They found us," Zira said, her voice steady but laced with dread. Alex's jaw tightened. "How? I thought we shook them." Zira pointed to a faint, blinking light on the console. A tracking beacon. It must have been planted on the ship before we left. Alex cursed under his breath, his mind racing. The enemy vessel was closing in fast, its sleek silhouette growing larger on the display. They didn't have the firepower to take it on, and the ship's jury-rigged systems wouldn't withstand another chase. "What do we do?" Zira asked, her voice betraying a rare hint of fear. Alex met her gaze, his expression hardening with determination. "We fight. Together." Zira's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Together," she repeated, a faint smile breaking through the tension. As Alex prepared the ship for what might be their final stand, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. No matter what happened next, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her. And that made all the difference. The final confrontation. The stars outside the cockpit window stretched into long, shimmering lines as Alex pushed the ship to its limits, the engines roaring in protest. The enemy vessel was closing in fast, its sleek, predatory design cutting through the black void like a razor-sharp blade. The flashing red lights of their proximity warning were a constant reminder of the danger bearing down on them. Alex gripped the controls tighter, his mind racing. He had no illusions. This wasn't just another escape. This was the final confrontation, and the odds were against them. "Brace yourself," Alex said, his voice steady but edged with tension. He glanced over at Zira, who was seated beside him, her gaze fixed on the monitor. "We're outmatched," Zira said quietly, her tone calm despite the situation. "Their ship is far superior to ours. We can't outrun them." "I know," Alex muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. But there was no time to dwell on fear. They had only one choice: fight. The enemy ship fired first, its pulse cannons lighting up the darkness like stars falling from the sky. A blast struck the side of their ship, sending it jolting violently to the side. Sparks flew from the control panel as systems scrambled to compensate for the sudden impact. "Shit!" Alex cursed, his fingers flying over the controls as he fought to steady the ship. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, but somehow they kept flying. "They're aiming for the engines," Zira said, her voice sharp with urgency. "If they disable our power, we're done." Alex nodded, his mind working quickly. "Then we need to keep them off us long enough to hit back. We don't have a choice anymore." He grabbed the emergency weapons control, activating the ship's small, improvised weapons system. It wasn't much, just a couple of makeshift blasters scavenged from the wreckage. But it was something. He targeted the enemy ship's weapons array and fired. The ship lurched forward as the blast hit, but it barely caused a scratch. "They're too strong," Alex muttered, frustration building in his chest. Zira's eyes locked onto him. "You're thinking too much. Trust yourself. Trust us. We've made it this far, haven't we?" Her words cut through the haze of doubt clouding his mind. He'd been trying to survive, trying to outrun their enemies. But in that moment, he realized something. He wasn't just trying to escape anymore. He was fighting for something far greater than himself. He was fighting for her. Alex took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "You're right. Let's end this." With renewed focus, Alex engaged the ship's maneuvering thrusters, sending them into a sharp barrel roll. The enemy ship fired again, but Alex's sudden change in direction sent the blast careening off into space. He could feel the ship's hull groaning under the strain, but it held. Zira was already at the secondary weapons console, her fingers flying over the interface. "I can't make them stop firing, but I can help with their targeting systems," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll scramble their sensors. That'll buy us a few seconds." "Do it," Alex urged, eyes darting between the monitor and the controls. His hands gripped the ship's steering wheel, steering them into a dangerous dive toward a nearby asteroid field. The enemy ship followed closely, but with Zira's interference, Their targeting systems began to glitch. The asteroid field was their last hope, a chaotic and dangerous labyrinth of floating rock that could either shield them or become their tomb. Alex piloted the ship through the narrow gaps between the rocks, forcing the enemy ship into a pursuit that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "They're not pulling back," Alex said, his voice tense. "They're trying to get a clear shot." "We have one shot," Zira said, her voice unwavering. "We can't outrun them in this field, but we can lead them into a trap." Alex's brow furrowed. "What kind of trap?" "A minefield," she said, her lips curling into a determined smile. "I planted one a few days ago when I was escaping my ship. They won't see it in time." Alex's eyes widened as realization dawned. "You mean to lure them in?" "Exactly," Zira interrupted. "We'll lead them straight into it, and when they hit it, we'll have enough time to escape." The thought of it was insane, but Alex couldn't deny it. It was their only shot. "All right," Alex said, his voice grim. "Let's do this." He angled the ship toward a narrow passage through the asteroid field, barely squeezing through the gaps as rocks collided around them. The enemy ship pursued, relentless, closing in with deadly precision. Zira's fingers were a blur as she activated the mines, sending them scattered throughout the field. "Now," she said, her voice firm. Alex punched the thrusters, sending the ship into a sharp turn just as the enemy ship flew into the minefield. The first mine detonated with a brilliant explosion, sending debris and shockwaves through the void. The enemy ship swerved, but it was too late. The mines triggered one after another, catching the ship in a series of blasts. For a moment, everything was chaos. The bright flashes of explosions lit up the field, and Alex could feel the shockwaves reverberating through his own ship. He forced himself to focus, guiding them through the aftermath. As the last of the explosions faded into the void, silence fell. Alex dared to glance at the screen. The enemy ship was crippled, its hull broken and smoking, but it was still drifting. Zira exhaled in relief. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Alex looked at her, his heart pounding. "We did, but we're not out of the woods yet." Their victory felt hollow, though, as they turned their attention to the remaining ships in the distance. Reinforcements, no doubt. But for the first time, Alex felt a sense of clarity. He knew they weren't done, but they had a chance. Together, they could face whatever came next. A new beginning. The aftermath of the battle still hung in the air as the wreckage of the enemy ship drifted lifelessly behind them. Alex's hands were stiff on the controls, but his mind was already processing the next steps. The silence in the cockpit was thick with tension, an eerie calm after the storm. He could feel Zira's gaze on him, her presence beside him, as much a comfort as it was a mystery. She had come so far from the alien who had first begged for help, now standing beside him as an equal, as someone he could trust. "Is it over?" Zira asked, her voice soft but laden with exhaustion. Alex glanced at her, seeing the exhaustion on her face, the once bright glow of her skin dimming slightly under the strain. Her eyes were tired, but there was something new in them, a spark of hope, a faint flicker of life that had been absent when they first met. He wished he could say it was over, but he knew better than that. "Not yet," he said quietly. "There's still a lot out there. We've made a dent, but we're far from done." Zira nodded solemnly, but there was no defeat in her expression. Her hand brushed over the console, adjusting the ship's trajectory as they sailed away from the remains of the enemy fleet. For a moment, Alex simply watched her, the way she handled the controls with the same expertise and determination she had shown when fighting beside him. She wasn't just an alien woman from another planet. She had become his partner in this war, someone whose fate was irrevocably intertwined with his. "We'll need to make repairs," Alex said, his voice steady. "And I'll need to find some supplies. Food, equipment, things like that." Zira turned to him, her eyes meeting his in a way that made him feel like she could read his thoughts. "We will," she agreed. But we also need to decide what comes next. We can't keep running forever. The words hit him harder than he expected. They had been living in a constant state of survival, always evading danger, always staying one step ahead. But she was right. At some point, they had to decide what they were fighting for. What kind of future could they have? Could they build something out of the ruins, something worth living for? "What do you want, Zira?" he asked, the question catching him off guard. It wasn't just a simple inquiry about the immediate future. It was about everything they had been through together. Zira hesitated, her fingers stilling over the console. She looked out at the endless stretch of space before her, as if searching for an answer in the stars. I never thought beyond the mission. My people taught me that to survive, I must focus only on what is necessary. But now, I see there is more. There's a life, Alex. A life I want to live. Her voice faltered slightly as she spoke, but Alex heard the weight of her words. She had learned, in these brief moments they had shared, that there was more to existence than just following orders, than just surviving. There was something bigger, something that demanded courage and trust, and yes, love. The same love that had pushed them both to fight, to sacrifice, to keep moving forward. He reached out, resting his hand gently on hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his, an act that felt both simple and profound. "I'm with you," Alex said, his voice low. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Zira's eyes softened. "I never thought I would say this, but I believe you, Alex." The ship hummed beneath them, a constant reminder that they weren't alone in the vastness of space, that they were still moving forward, still alive. Alex knew they had a long road ahead, full of unknowns, but for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. With Zira by his side, he felt like they could face whatever the galaxy threw at them. "You know," Alex said, his lips curling into a faint grin, "I think we could use a little rest. We've earned it." Zira raised an eyebrow, a small, amused smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Rest? You know what's out here, right? We're never safe." "I'm not talking about the danger," Alex replied, his eyes sparkling. "I'm talking about us. We've been running, fighting, surviving. Maybe we need a place to live for a while. Somewhere safe, somewhere where we can catch our breath." Zira seemed to consider this for a moment, her gaze distant but hopeful. "I never thought such a place existed. But perhaps you're right. Maybe just for a while, we can find a place where we don't have to keep running." "Maybe we can," Alex said with conviction. "And when we do, we can finally figure out what we're really fighting for." Zira looked at him, her face softened with something like wonder. Maybe that's what this journey has been all along. Not about survival, not about the fight, but about finding a reason to live. The ship coasted through the stars, the distant lights of the galaxy stretching out before them. As the ship's systems hummed with quiet energy, Alex realized that in this endless void, he had found something more valuable than any victory. He had found someone to stand by his side, someone who shared the same dream of freedom, of life beyond survival. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. But for now, they would simply exist, together. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.